Okay, so we're back. I got just a little bit more of this Mitchell Sapolsky video. I wanted to make it through to see if there's anything interesting here. We're just about done. It looks like there's a couple of questions maybe or some exchange between them. Yeah, I want to hear this. So let's just jump right into it.
Enjoyed it as the first audience member that managed to listen to it, and I hope that the viewers which will see this on YouTube will enjoy it too. Before we end, can I ask one question to both of you, if possible? I wanted to ask Professor Sapolsky first. I guess you agree that we have at least this intuitive sense that we're free agents. That might be all an illusion, but we believe that we're the authors of our action. I mean, you're trying to persuade people that this belief is not that secure. But how can you make sense via an evolutionary biology lenses of our illusion that we're free agents?
Because it's wonderfully protective and sort of concluding there's no God, there's no free will, the universe is empty and indifferent and meaningless is kind of a bummer. And for a lot of people, and it's not a surprise that a viewpoint like that is often associated with things like clinical depression and such. We have evolved as the species that knows that someday our hearts are going to stop beating. And the only way to pull that off is we've also had to evolve as a species that is capable of enormous amounts of self-deception and rationalization because it gets us up in the morning.
Right. And how do you make sense of your
So
lights?
hold on now. So what's his hmm. I mean, I get the idea that reasons are causes. And so, if you believe a certain thing, it's going to cause you to act in a certain way if you're a determinist, right? But what is he actually saying right here? So the question was, how can we make sense from an evolutionary point of view of the illusion of agency? Um, so the way we were talking about in the last video, the phenomenology associated with all of this stuff, the feeling that we have from the inside that we're actually making these choices. So if determinism is true, as Sapolsky thinks that it is, um, then there's no, you might think, reason we should have had this illusion as opposed to just not feel indifferent about it or not think about it at all or not worry about whether our actions are free or not. But yeah, we seem to be very convinced that they are free, and in fact, many major religions is a central idea there. So his answer is, well, it's beneficial to think this way because of the kind of animal that we are. um, okay, so is it just that that's the way it turned out to be, or is there some reason? Like, could you have an animal like us that was didn't have this illusion? I mean, he clearly thinks so since he wants people to stop believing it. But yeah, so this is interesting. Okay, let's go on.
Of your life's work via this perspective. So, for instance, when you wrote the book that we don't have free will, and perhaps you had to put a lot of effort into it, motivating yourself to write another page and another page, given that in your back, the back of your mind was, this is not my merit, I'm not really doing this, I'm just a product of low-level things without agency. How um, do you not feel a tension between those things, or do you think that tension can be argued away?
Oh, I don't feel that tension at all because 95% of the time I'm a flaming hypocrite and cannot function as if it's really the case. And if somebody afterwards says, whoa, nice shirt or whatever, for 3 milliseconds, I'm going to feel pleased and somehow interpreting that as I turned out to be a better sort of person than I would have been otherwise. And here's evidence of it. And all I can see as a moral imperative is to stop at that point and reflect and reflect and reflect and get back to it's not by chance I became a sort of person who would write a book like this. And it's not by chance that I did not turn out to be a serial murderer. And it's not by it, like every now and then, you know, I see it's rather lunatic to expect somebody to function this way all the time, and I sure can't. And maybe all we can hope for is be suspicious of the times that things seem obvious, because every now and then we can function that way. And what we've shown historically is we could do it again and again and again. And we think differently about stuff now than we did in the past. And
Hmm.
each time that happens, not only doesn't the roof cave in, it becomes a more humane world. So even amid that, nonetheless, most of the time I can't function this way. And but we need to do the work to get there.
Interesting. So is his view that we could get there and that there could be a future version of humans that had dispelled the illusion of free will? What would that mean exactly? So, like I think I've dispelled the illusion that the sun rises, but still looks that way. So I haven't dispelled the appearances. Although there are some philosophers who have argued that you can like come to experience the Earth going around the sun as opposed to the sun rising. I think Paul Churchland once famously tried to make this point. But anyway, so if observation is theory laden, it's a complicated story. But yeah, so he says we got to do the work to get there. So he can't do it. He can't like live this way now, he's saying. But he's not saying it's impossible to live this way. He's saying it would take a lot of work to get to the point where you view life in this way. And that would be better if we did. Okay, so I think he is committed to the view that this illusion of free will can be dispelled. But does that mean that we would no longer feel like we were free? We would sort of, because I've heard Sam Harris say that if you pay attention, you don't feel like you're free, you just feel like you're a passenger. And I was like, I don't get that. But so is that what he would? Is that his view that if we really knew all this stuff, we would start to feel less like we'd feel more like a passenger? Um, in our actions, observing them, noting them, etc., but not really causing them or having a free influence over them? Or would it still feel free, but we would learn to see through it the way I've seen through the sun rising? And now I say the sun rises and so forth, but I think that's an interesting way things appear that isn't the way they are. So does maybe he think we'll get to that stage? I wonder if these things are in his book, which I have not read.
Right. And now I'm going to ask Professor Mitchell one or two questions. And those are, I mean, you know that there are at least a number of other prominent philosophers who try to use evolutionary theorizing in order to make sense of free will. Daniel Dennett is a prominent example. I wanted to ask you, in what ways does your evolutionary approach differ from Dennett's? And also, it seemed to me, I wrote a paper on Douglas Hofstadter.
Well, Dennett is a compatibilist, so it'll be interesting. Someone finally brought this up, even though he doesn't
Philosophy
say
of
it.
mind. And I was wondering, how do you see your view differing from that of Douglas Hofstadter? So can you please compare your view with those of those
Yeah.
two authors?
Yeah. So Daniel Dennett has done amazing work explaining in a sense how freedom evolves, as one of his books is titled. I think that actually both Robert and I disagree with his claim of compatibilism and find it incoherent. Because if the universe were really, really deterministic, but there's only one future open, it just makes no sense to talk about choices and to talk about agents and causes and doings. There would just be happenings and one line of it. So while we end up in a similar position, the route that he takes to get there, I think, is really suspect. And what I wanted to do instead was take what I take to be where physics actually, starts right now, is that the world is indeterministic, and then that just flips the question on its head, right? Rather than saying where does the freedom come from, we have to ask where does the control come from, and that's the the arguments that I try to make is how that can happen. And the one thing I will say in Dennett's case is that he has all these thought experiments about individuals where you put them in this case and they're going to go kill their uncle, but they don't, but an evil neurosurgeon, unbeknownst to them, has made them do it. And then they did it, but they didn't want to. So are they morally responsible? And it just does your head in. What I want to say is, look, if you're assuming the world is deterministic, you can't just assume these things exist. You have to go way, way back and tell me, how did it come to be that these agents even evolved in this universe where atoms are just bouncing off each other in deterministic ways? So that's where I differ with Dan. And as far as Douglas,
Interesting. Wow. So what the hell has he been talking about this whole time? um, Interesting. So he really does see. So the idea that indeterminism at the fundamental level has something to do with how how it percolates up. I guess that's an open question, whether the brain, therefore, is a determinist system. But if his idea is that there's just randomness and then the brain has to somehow control that, how does that get around the argument that those systems aren't themselves determined? I don't know. I don't see how this is a coherent position. He thinks Dan's position is not coherent. I don't understand. Huh. It sounds like more of a semantic term. Well, first of all, so he thinks the world's not fully determinate. I think that's an open question. Quantum mechanics has different interpretations. There's the randomness ones, but then the non-randomness ones. So I think that's an open question. But even so, I don't think you can go from there to things in a macroscopic world being indeterminate. They seem pretty determined. I mean, in terms of being able to predict future states from past states and stuff like that. So, huh. Yeah, there's more to think through here than I thought. Okay. I mean, the reason I'm having a problem with this is because he says there's nothing but the brain. Cool. There's indeterminacy at the fundamental level, perhaps. So there's going to be randomness, which way things go. So then you want control systems. Cool. But they're part of the physical world, part of the brain. So they're going to be indeterminate, which means random. So where is the control of those? Yeah, so I don't really see where this bottoms out. Someone help me see my way out of this. Is what he's saying. I mean, I have been saying this whole time I see a marriage of the two views, a view like his and a view like Sapolsky's and compatibilism. They're saying they just can't think of the words being used that way. I don't understand where that comes from, but okay. I guess I did used to be that way too. So I guess anyway. Okay, interesting.
Satter's work goes, I love it. I've been very influenced by it. I think one of the sort of main parts that is really, really crucial is this idea of recursive neural processing, where it's not just that there's a one-way hierarchy to some top CEO that just sits there. It's this very much recursive, reverberant kind of patterns of activity that he would say constitute the self, that mediate consciousness, that mediate cognition, and so on. And I would very much agree with that. And I think it's a way out of the infinite regress that gets you to this dualistic idea that for you to be in charge, there has to be something outside that's sort of your brain, but not in your brain, which is to use a phrase from Robert's book, right? So Hofstadter's view allows that thing to be both of your brain and in your brain, and not a ghost in the machine. It's just the whole pattern. And that just feels intuitively like it's along the right lines to me, although the details obviously have to be worked out.
Okay.
If I may,
sure.
Just briefly, I see the main difference between Kevin and Dennett in thinking about evolution is that Kevin understands evolution and the brain and science and genetics, and make of that what you will from that statement.
Right. I want to thank both of you for taking the time to join me today, and also the audience who hopefully.
Wow. Shots fired. Hey, man, it's diss track season. What are we doing here?
Has listened so far.
Holy moly.
I guess the opening statements really clarified Professor Mitchell's.
I mean, say what you want about Dennett, but to say he doesn't understand evolution is a statement for sure. Wow. Okay.
Professor Sapolsky's position, but hopefully the back and forth allowed you to understand their views a bit better. If you really want to see their careful exposition of their work, this is the books. You have Free Agents by Professor Kevin Mitchell. You have Determined by Professor Robert Sapolsky. And yeah, thank you again for joining me today. And in less than 24 hours, I will send you.
Okay, so that was very interesting. Not what I expected. I would like to find out more about Mitchell's view because I don't understand it. Yeah, so his book is on my list to read, so hopefully I'll get to it. Let's see, what is this? Holy moly! So I was hoping to read it in the summer, actually, but very interesting. I'm confused.